The emergency closure notice appeared before anyone at the city licensing office checked the active inspection roster. Mercer Market did not know that yet. Elaine Mercer was standing behind the front counter, one hand touching the narrow strip of paper feeding from the refrigerated case monitor, the other resting beside a folded white towel. She was waiting for the compressor cycle to finish. The permit was active. The cooling system was operating normally. The temperature reading was within the legal range. The inspector named on the notice was not working that day. For several quiet seconds, that should have been the whole record. Elaine had opened the store at 6 that morning, wearing dark slacks, a gray cotton shirt, and shoes with flour dust near the soles from unpacking the first bread delivery. At 2:17 that afternoon, the municipal portal created a different version. Emergency nuisance closure. Inspection time, 1:48. Inspector login, Denise Holcomb. Temperature reading, blank. Witness confirmation, blank. 3 minutes later, the bell above the green front door rang. Lieutenant Curtis Van entered first. Officer Daniel Shaw followed him. Officer Owen Pike came in last and remained near the door. Van carried a paper coffee cup. He placed it on Elaine's counter without asking, beside a jar of wrapped candy and the handwritten delivery schedule. Earlier that day, Elaine had watched ordinary enforcement happen outside her window. A white delivery driver left his truck in the loading lane beyond the posted limit. A patrol officer asked him to move it. No citation followed. The manager of a national pharmacy chain called the licensing office about a permit error. Someone guided him through the correction by telephone. A contractor across the street left lumber across half the sidewalk. A city employee photographed it, spoke with him, and allowed him an hour to clear the path. Each problem received a correction. None received an emergency closure. Van looked past Elaine at the crowded shelves, the old register, and the small handwritten price cards. "We're beginning an enhanced enforcement cycle on this block," he said. Elaine did not reach for his coffee. "What does that require from me?" "Cooperation." He explained that selected businesses could contribute to a neighborhood stabilization fund. Participants received advance guidance before inspections. Those who chose not to participate could expect the city to apply every code exactly as written. "How much?" Elaine asked. $5,000. "Which city account receives it?" Van's smile changed slightly. "It is not that kind of arrangement. Will there be an invoice?" Officer Shaw looked toward the refrigerated display. Pike remained beside the door. Van leaned one forearm against the counter. "Places like this usually cannot absorb a long closure. I am offering you a way to avoid one." Elaine looked at his badge, then at the municipal tablet in Pike's hand. "Is that an order from the department?" "It is practical advice." "That was not my question." Van lifted his coffee and took a slow drink. He listed the options without raising his voice. A food storage review, a fire exit inspection, a vendor license hold, a sidewalk citation, a permit appeal that could remain pending for weeks. He spoke as if he were explaining the weather. Elaine had operated Mercer Market for 15 years. She knew the value of the milk in the first case, the insulin waiting in the medical cooler, and the sliced meat delivered before noon. She also knew how long each could survive without power. "I will not pay you," she said. Van turned toward Pike. "Open the nuisance file." Pike unlocked the tablet. Shaw walked to the electrical panel beside the refrigerated cases. Elaine stepped out from behind the counter. "The equipment has not failed." Van did not look at it. "That is under review. No inspection has occurred." Pike's fingers paused above the screen. Van read him a code. Shaw removed an orange closure strip from his vest and pressed it across the refrigeration switch. Elaine looked directly at him. "If you cut that power, the loss begins immediately." Shaw glanced at Van. Then he moved the switch. The compressor stopped. The store became quiet enough for Elaine to hear the paper monitor advance. A straight line held for several seconds. Then it began to rise. Pike entered the inspection time as 1:48. Elaine saw the timestamp on the paper. She did not reach for the tablet. She did not argue about Van's authority. She pointed to the strip feeding from the monitor. "Do not remove that paper." Pike looked at Van again. Van picked up his coffee. "No one is interested in your receipt tape." He gave Elaine 48 hours to reconsider the payment. Then the three officers left. By the time the bell stopped moving above the door, the line on the temperature strip had crossed the first safety threshold. June Park stood outside the entrance to her laundromat 2 storefronts away. She had watched Shaw cut the power. She had 3 orange closure notices in a drawer beneath her register. When Elaine asked whether she would record what she had seen, June looked toward the patrol car. "Not today," she said. Inside Mercer Market, the paper continued to move. Elaine did not call a reporter. She did not post a photograph of the closure strip. She locked the front door, moved the insulin into an insulated carrier, and began an inventory loss sheet at the small desk in the back room. Product, batch number, storage limit, time power was cut. Time the monitor crossed the safety threshold. Disposal value, witness. The temperature strip continued feeding through the machine while the refrigerated cases warmed. Elaine tore off nothing. She photographed the full length where it remained attached, then copied the emergency notice from the municipal portal. The notice claimed the inspection had occurred at 1:48. The power had been cut at 2:31. The first unsafe reading appeared at 2:46. She placed the documents beside each other. One record claimed the danger came first. The machine showed the officers had created it. That evening, Elaine found Hector Salazar inside the restaurant he had closed 8 months earlier. Chairs rested upside down on the tables. A stack of unopened mail leaned against the register. Hector listened while she explained what had happened. Then he unlocked a drawer. Inside were 11 cash withdrawal slips, 3 nuisance notices, and a complaint acknowledgement from Internal Affairs. The final page stated that his allegation had been closed for insufficient corroboration. "No one called the bakery," Hector said. "No one called the laundromat. They asked whether I had video of the cash changing hands. I said no. A week later, Van raised the payment." Elaine placed a blank form on the table. It had 3 columns. What happened? Who was present? What record still exists? Hector looked at it but did not pick up a pen. "You think paper changes them?" "No," Elaine said. "Paper changes what they can deny." He still did not sign. Elaine left the form with him. Before midnight, she assembled 6 notices from businesses along the block, 2 insurance denials, Hector's complaint closure, and the temperature strip from Mercer Market. She labeled each item, recorded where it came from, and created a separate index for documents she had not personally collected. The package went to the State Public Integrity Bureau. Investigator Marisol Grant called the next morning. "You built this like an evidence submission. I used to examine financial crimes for the Army." There was a pause. "Does that give you access to any protected system?" "No." "Good," Marisol said. "Then we prove this without asking anyone to trust your resume." Elaine respected her immediately. A preservation request reached the city before noon. The first data return showed that the inspector named on Elaine's closure notice had been on approved leave. Her credential had still been used to create 17 emergency notices over 4 months. 13 belonged to businesses owned by Black, Latino, Asian, or immigrant families. None belonged to the national chains on the same streets. The notices also shared the same misspelling. Immediate public hazard. 2 letters where one should have been. Marisol requested the device records. Every notice had been created from the same patrol tablet. June Park came to Mercer Market after dark, carrying a thick envelope beneath her coat. She placed it on the counter but kept one hand on it. "My brother is on probation," she said. "Van knows where he reports." Elaine did not promise safety. She did not say doing the right thing would protect June from every consequence. "Marisol can put the terms in writing," Elaine said. "You decide after you read them." June took the envelope home. The next morning, Curtis Van stopped visiting the store in person. Instead, the pressure moved through systems. A fire code referral appeared. The vendor portal marked Mercer Market as pending nuisance appeal. A supplier canceled a refrigerated delivery after receiving a warning that unloading at the address could result in citation. Elaine kept the dry goods section open. The empty refrigerated cases remained dark behind the orange strip. Hector came in during the afternoon. "No one is going to stand beside you," he said. Elaine had slept less than 4 hours. "Because everyone is waiting for someone else to stand first." The sentence came out harder than she intended. Hector looked away. Elaine exhaled. "You do not owe me courage," she said. "But if you keep the records, do not let them say the records never existed." That evening, June watched employees at the neighborhood pharmacy carry temperature-sensitive medicine into plastic bins. An orange notice covered the electrical panel. The phrase "immediate public hazard" appeared across the top. June returned to her laundromat. She scanned every notice in her envelope. Then she signed a declaration and uploaded the files through Marisol's evidence portal. 2 days later, the controlled payment was approved. Every bill was logged. Elaine wore a transmitter sewn beneath the edge of her jacket. 2 independent cameras covered the counter. She had a phrase that would end the operation if Van changed the plan. He arrived alone. Elaine placed the cash inside a plain deposit pouch. Van counted it once. "This should make the notice fall out of the active queue," he said. He left with the pouch under his arm. 4 minutes later, municipal audit data showed Owen Pike opening Elaine's notice and changing its status to administrative hold. 3 minutes after that, part of the marked cash entered a counting kiosk inside a convenience store owned by Van's brother-in-law. Marisol now had probable cause. Then Internal Affairs opened Elaine's complaint. The commander changed its video retention status from permanent hold to routine. He did not know the city's audit mirror preserved every change. Marisol printed the access log and laid it over the temperature strip. One record showed when the damage began. The other showed who tried to shorten the memory of it. The warrants were served before the morning shift changed. No helicopters arrived. No cameras waited outside. State investigators entered the police department, the licensing office, Curtis Van's home, and the convenience store owned by his brother-in-law at the same time. They collected patrol tablets, personal phones, permit exports, cash envelopes, and a ledger hidden behind cleaning supplies in a storage room. The ledger used initials instead of business names. The amounts matched Hector Salazar's withdrawals. The dates matched June Park's notices. Several marked bills remained inside a deposit bag beneath the convenience store counter. Investigators also recovered photographs of a fishing boat, a vacation property, and a restored pickup truck. All 3 had been purchased through accounts connected to businesses that existed only on paper. Daniel Shaw began cooperating before noon. Investigators showed him the body camera footage of the orange strip being placed across Elaine's refrigeration switch. Then they showed him the closure notice claiming the inspection had happened 43 minutes earlier. Shaw admitted that Van chose which businesses to pressure. He also identified the phrase used in their private messages: low response accounts. It meant stores without corporate attorneys, political connections, or owners likely to reach an outside agency. Owen Pike continued to insist that he had never accepted cash. Marisol Grant did not argue with him. "The evidence does not say you collected it," she said. "It says you created the record that made the payment necessary." 3 days later, Judge Rebecca Sloan opened the emergency receivership hearing. Elaine sat behind Marisol with the temperature strip inside a clear evidence sleeve. June sat beside Hector. Neither looked toward Van. The city attorney described the case as a series of fragmented field decisions. Judge Sloan asked for the records in chronological order. Marisol began with Mercer Market's active permit, then the patrol location data. Curtis Van entered the store at 2:20. Owen Pike created the closure notice using an absent inspector's login. The notice listed an inspection time of 1:48. Daniel Shaw cut power to the refrigerated cases at 2:31. The temperature monitor began rising 1 minute later. Elaine refused the payment. The closure remained active. Van later accepted $5,000. Pike changed the notice to administrative hold 4 minutes after the exchange. Part of the marked cash entered the counting kiosk 3 minutes later. Internal Affairs reduced the evidence retention status after receiving an external preservation request. The city attorney called the complaints uncorroborated allegations from dissatisfied business owners. Marisol placed 17 closure notices on the evidence screen. Each carried the same misspelling. Each came from the same patrol tablet. 13 belonged to businesses owned by people of color or immigrant families. None belonged to a national chain. Then she read the names of the businesses: the laundromat, the pharmacy, the restaurant, the repair shop, the bakery, Mercer Market. One after another, the places Van's messages had reduced to low-response accounts were entered into the court record by their full names. Van looked down for the first time. Judge Sloan turned toward the city attorney. "Which part remains uncorroborated?" He did not answer. Elaine's former military work came up only when Van's attorney asked why a shopkeeper knew how to construct an evidence index. "I examined financial crime records for the Army," Elaine said. "That is not why this case exists. The records are." Item Van was terminated for cause before trial. He was later convicted of extortion, conspiracy, falsification of municipal records, and laundering proceeds through related businesses. The boat, vacation property, restored truck, and cash accounts were forfeited. They were sold under court supervision. The first payments from those sales went to the businesses whose names had appeared in the ledger. Shaw received a reduced sentence for early cooperation, but lost his law enforcement certification permanently. His cooperation changed the length of his sentence. It did not erase the closure strip he placed on Elaine's equipment. Pike was convicted of unlawful system access and record falsification. He was barred from law enforcement, licensing, inspection, and any other public enforcement position. The Internal Affairs Commander lost sign-off authority and was referred for obstruction review. The final finding stated that he had not created the extortion scheme, but had protected it by closing complaints without comparing them. Every business complaint he had approved during the previous 4 years was reopened under outside review. The court approved a consent decree. Emergency closures now required confirmation from a civilian licensing supervisor. Inspection credentials locked automatically when the assigned employee was off duty. Timestamps could no longer be overwritten. Any correction created a second visible entry. 3 complaints linked to the same unit, tablet, or enforcement code triggered automatic external review. No police supervisor could reduce evidence retention after a preservation reference had been entered. The city also had to calculate business losses from sensor readings, inventory records, and supplier data rather than relying only on an officer's report. A public monitor issued quarterly reports listing every closure, override, complaint disposition, and unusual access event. Months later, Hector reopened his restaurant. The restitution payment did not restore every year he had lost. It replaced the refrigeration system, cleared part of the debt, and put employees back in the dining room. June extended the laundromat's hours during the first week, so returning businesses could clean uniforms and table linens. The pharmacy restored its medicine deliveries. The bakery removed the surcharge it had quietly added to cover the monthly payments. Mercer Market received a new refrigeration sensor. The technician tested the power interruption and recovery sequence while Elaine watched. The machine printed a short record. System stable. Test interruption. Recovery confirmed. Technician identified. Witness identified. No field was blank. Elaine tore off the test section and placed it inside the maintenance binder. She did not frame it. She did not place it beside her military records. Then she installed a fresh roll. The bell above the front door rang. A customer called her name from the coffee counter. Elaine closed the monitor cover, listened to the paper move in one clean line, and returned to the register before the customer had to call twice. This is a fictional,